Esther 9:15, and killed 300 men at Shushan. 300 men killed at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. They didn't touch the enemy's valuables. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives. So they gathered together from the different provinces. I got that a little wet, sorry. And protected their lives. The Jews protected themselves from their enemies and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives. Esther 9:16, and had rest from their enemies. They rested, had relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies. They killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. They didn't touch the valuables of their enemies. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Can you see it? They had rest from their enemies and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on their plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Esther 9:17, and on the 14th of the month, 14th day, they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness, a day of feasting and joy. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting. Jews celebrating in unwalled towns. No walls. Here's a wall around the town. They didn't have walls. The villages. They were villages. And on the 14th of the month they rested, and made it a day of fasting, feasting, and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting. Esther 9:19, as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. Mordecai writes to the Jews near and the Jews far, and to the Jews in all the provinces. So they celebrated it as a holiday for sending presents to one another, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. Esther 9:21, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly, the 14th and 15th day of the months of Adar. Adar. Mordecai wrote to establish for every year to celebrate the 14th and the 15th day, the days in which the Jews had rest from their enemies. The Jews had rest from their enemies. To establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th day of the month of Adar, the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies. Esther 9:22, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to a holiday, from sadness to a day of celebration, that they should make them days of feasting and joy. They'll make them days of feasting and eating and joy. It'll be the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy. Esther 9:22, of sending presents to one another. Of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor and needy. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun. We accept this custom, the Jews, as Mordecai had written to them. Sorry, it looks like a feather. Sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them. Esther 9:24, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, Haman, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them. Haman wanted to destroy the Jews and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. Haman cast pur to destroy the Jews, like rolling the dice. But when Esther came before the king, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, sorry, it's all taped together, Esther 9:25, he commanded by letter, do this, that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews, Haman's plot against the Jews, should return on his own head. The plot came back on Haman's own head. Haman's plot, evil plot against the Jews, came back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Haman and his sons died, were killed. He commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews would return on his own head, that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Esther 9:26. So they called these days Purim, after the name Purim. The days were called Purim because of Pur, casting lots. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, everything in the letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, what was happening, what was going on. So they called these days Purim after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, Esther 9:27, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves. We will celebrate these days, and their descendants. We will, sons and daughters of the Jews, and all who would join them, will celebrate with you, that without fail, no failure, they should celebrate these 2 days every year. Celebrating will definitely happen each year on these 2 days. The Jews established and imposed it on themselves and their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year. Esther 9:27. According to the written instructions for what to do, and according to the prescribed time, the right time, that these days should be remembered, we will remember, and kept throughout every generation. Older generation, we will celebrate. Middle-aged generation, we will celebrate. Younger generation, we will celebrate. Every family, we will celebrate. According to the written instructions and according to the prescribed time, that these days should be remembered and kept through every generation, every family, Esther 9:28, every province, we will celebrate, in every city, we will celebrate, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews. We will definitely celebrate Purim, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Every province and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Okay, gotta read this fast. Esther 9:29. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote this with full authority to confirm the second letter about Purim, and Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of praise and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of the fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Esther 9:32. So the decree of Esther, the command of Esther, confirmed these matters of Purim. Purim customs were confirmed, as it was written in the book. To confirm these days at Purim of their appointed time,